All right, so are you ready to dive into another fascinating true crime case with me today? Because today we're talking about the Crimson Phantom, a serial killer who terrorized Oregon in the late 90s.
I am indeed. I've been looking forward to discussing this one. It's a case that has so many layers, the psychology of the killer, the mystery surrounding the victims, and of course the chilling nature of the crimes themselves.
It really is a fascinating case and disturbing too, which is why I wanted to take a deep dive into it with you. And we're going to be using this book as our guide, The Crimson Phantom, The Oregon Redhead Murders.
It's an excellent resource. It really delves into the complexities of the case and offers some intriguing insights into the mind of the killer.
Right. And one of the things that always gets me about these serial killer cases is how they can seem so random at first. Like these women just vanish into thin air.
Yeah, that's the part that really grabs the public's attention, the fear of the unknown, the idea that anyone could be a target.
Exactly. But as the investigation unfolds, you start to see a pattern emerge. And in this case, the pattern was as chilling as it was specific: young women with red hair, all found posed with a red rose.
That's the detail that really makes this case stand out. The red hair, the red roses, it suggests a very particular type of killer, someone with a very specific fantasy or obsession.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Tell me about Emily Carter, the first victim.
Emily was a law student at the University of Oregon, bright personality, well-liked, known for her fiery red hair, of course. And in October of '97, she vanished after a night out with friends at a cafe in downtown Portland.
So she's just walking out of this cafe, probably thinking about getting home and then gone.
Her friends initially just thought she must have gotten a ride with someone else, but a few days later, her car was found abandoned at the end of the Columbia River Gorge keys in the ignition purse, untouched.
So right away, it's clear this wasn't a robbery.
No, it was something far more sinister. And about a week later, a hiker made a gruesome discovery: Emily's body. And it wasn't just the fact that she had been murdered that was so disturbing. It was the way she was found.
Posed, right.
Exactly. Hands carefully folded, lips painted red, and a single red rose placed on her mouth.
Okay, so we see that red rose right from the start. That becomes his calling card.
Yes, but it's more than just a calling card. The posing of the body, the meticulous nature of it all, it suggests a level of control and premeditation that's very specific to certain types of killers.
It's like he wanted her to be found. He was putting on a display.
Exactly. And that's a key insight for investigators because it suggests a deeper psychological motivation, a need for power and control over the victim, even in death.
Okay, so now the police have to be thinking they've got a serious problem on their hands.
Absolutely. And enter Detective Mark Calloway, a seasoned investigator with years of experience, but even he felt a unique sense of unease about this case.
Like he could sense that this was something different, something really disturbing.
Right, the precision, the ritualistic elements, it all pointed to a killer unlike any he'd encountered before. And sadly, his instincts were right. Weeks later, another young woman vanished, Rachel Monroe, an artist from Eugene Last, seen walking towards a parking lot after a poetry reading.
And security cameras caught a shadowy figure lurking in the background, right?
Yes, and her case followed a horrifyingly similar pattern. Days later, her body was found posed, just like Emily's red rose and all.
Okay, so now it's not just an isolated incident, it's officially a pattern. And the term serial killer has to be flashing in everyone's minds at this point.
Absolutely. And the similarities are too striking to be coincidental. Young women, red hair, posed with a red rose. It all points to someone deliberately targeting a very specific type of victim.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, it doesn't stop there. Two more women disappear from different towns in Oregon, both redheads, both later found posed with that single red rose. It's like he's signing his name on these gruesome works of art.
It's a terrifying thought, and it's at this point that the case really explodes in the media. The Crimson Phantom becomes a household name.
So what do the authorities do? I'm guessing this is when the FBI gets involved.
You bet. With the body count rising and the public on edge, the FBI brings in their top experts, including a criminal profiler.
Now, I know you're a big fan of criminal profiling, so can you break down for our listeners what exactly that involves?
Well, it's all about analyzing the details of the crimes, the crime scenes, the victim profiles, and trying to create a psychological sketch of the offender, looking for clues in the killer's actions that might reveal something about their motives, their personality, their background.
So it's kind of like putting together a puzzle, but instead of pieces, you're using psychological clues.
Precisely.
And what did the profiler make of this case, especially that whole posing the bodies thing?
Well, the profiler highlighted that as a major red flag. It suggests a personal connection to the victims, a desire for power and control, and most importantly, an obsession. This wasn't just about ending lives, it was about dominating and possessing these women, even in death.
And the red rose, what about that? What kind of significance did they attach to that?
That was a big one. The profiler saw the red rose as a symbol, a representation of the killer's twisted perception of romance, or maybe a way of mocking the victims. adding insult to the ultimate injury. But there's another layer to consider. The fact that he leaves it on display like a signature suggests he wants to be recognized, even feared.
It's like he's playing a game with the authorities, taunting them with his calling card. But here's where things take an interesting turn. A young woman comes forward and tells the police about a strange encounter she had with a man at a coffee shop in Medford.
This witness testimony was a huge break in the case. She described the man as polite but oddly persistent, asking about her hair color, her interests, even her relationship status.
So in light of what we know about the victims, these seemingly innocent questions taking a whole new meaning.
Exactly. It's like he was screaming potential targets, looking for someone who fit his twisted criteria.
But there's one detail that really connects this encounter to the Crimson Phantom, right?
Oh yes, the detail that sends chills down your spine.
Don't tell me.
A single red rose. As she was leaving the coffee shop, she noticed it sitting on his table.
Whoa. Okay, that's more than just a coincidence. That's like a giant neon sign pointing right at him.
Exactly. That single detail links this seemingly random encounter to the horrific crimes plaguing Oregon. It confirms that he's actively seeking out victims. And that red rose, it's more than just a morbid flourish. It's his calling card, a way for him to say, I was here.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. The police have a lead, a face to go with the Phantom. So who is this guy and what's his connection to the victims?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And to understand that part of the story, we need to go back in time. Back to a woman named Charlotte Mayfield.
Okay, Charlotte Mayfield. So who is she and how does she fit into all of this?
This is where the investigation takes a fascinating turn. Remember how we talked about that striking resemblance between all the victims? Well, it turns out they all look remarkably like Charlotte Mayfield.
Wow. So not only were they all redheads, but they specifically resembled this one woman. That's a pretty huge detail.
It is. And it led investigators to uncover a disturbing incident from Charlotte's past. Back in 1979, she filed a restraining order against a man named Daniel Whitmore.
Daniel Whitmore. Okay, that name's going to be important. I can feel it. So tell me about this restraining order. What happened?
Well, the police reports painted a very unsettling picture. Whitmore was a quiet, unassuming literature major who had developed a serious fixation on Charlotte. It started with small gestures, leaving her love letters and poems, but it quickly escalated to him lurking outside her classes and even showing up at her dorm uninvited.
Classic case of unrequited love turning into something a lot darker.
Unfortunately, yeah. And you see this pattern a lot in these types of cases. The inability to accept rejection, their reality becomes warped. They convince themselves that their feelings are reciprocated even when it's clear they're not.
It's like their obsession takes over and reason goes out the window. So Charlotte rejected him, understandably so. It sounds like he was way overstepping boundaries. What did he do after she filed the restraining order?
He withdrew from school and vanished. For almost 20 years, there was no trace of him.
Hold on, 20 years? He resurfaces around the same time these murders start happening? That can't be a coincidence.
That's a huge red flag for sure, and it raises a lot of questions. Did he hold on to that rejection all those years? Was he harboring a grudge waiting for the right moment to strike?
Okay, the pieces are starting to fit together. The victims resembling Charlotte, the red roses, the timing, it all points to Whitmore. But what was he doing all those years? Where did he go?
Well, that's the crazy part. He wasn't hiding in some dark corner or anything. He was living a seemingly normal life as an English professor at a small community college in Salem.
So he was right there in plain sight all along? It's incredible how people can compartmentalize their lives. Like they can have this whole dark side that nobody suspects.
It's true, and it's not uncommon with serial killers. They often lead seemingly normal lives. They blend in, they hold down jobs, is part of what makes them so difficult to catch.
So what happens next? Do the police confront Whitmore?
Well, with all signs pointing toward him, they obtain a warrant to search his home. And what they find is even more disturbing than anyone could have imagined.
Okay, I'm officially creeped out. What did they discover?
In the basement, they found a collection of red-haired dolls neatly arranged on his shelf.
Dolls. Okay, that's weird, but I'm not seeing the connection yet.
Each doll was meticulously labeled with the name of one of the victims.
Oh my god, that's chilling. It's like something out of a horror movie.
It was a horrifying discovery for sure. It confirmed that this wasn't just random violence. There was a clear pattern, a deliberate connection to the victims.
But it's also incredibly sad to think that these women, these vibrant lives, were reduced to dolls in the mind of this killer. But the dolls weren't the only thing they found, right?
No. In his desk drawer, hidden beneath stacks of papers and books, they found something even more disturbing. A journal filled with pages and pages of obsessive writings about Charlotte Mayfield, detailing his infatuation with her, his anger at her rejection, his fantasies of revenge.
So even after all those years, he was still fixated on her. Guess that answers our question about whether he held a grudge.
One entry in particular stood out to investigators. It read, "Love never dies, but rejection festers. It grows, and someday it must be avenged.
Chilling words, especially in light of what he did, but there's still something that doesn't quite add up. If Charlotte was his true obsession, why kill all those other women? What was the point?
That's the question that haunted investigators, and the answer, as we'll soon discover, lies in a final, gut-wrenching twist that reveals the true depth of Whitmar's twisted obsession.
Okay, you gotta tell me this twist. What could possibly make this story even more messed up?
Well, remember how the police tracked down Charlotte to tell her about Whitmar's arrest?
Right, to let her know that her stalker from all those years ago had finally been caught.
Exactly. But during that conversation, they learned something that changed everything. Charlotte and her family had moved back to Oregon
Wait, seriously? When?
the year before the murders started.
Oh, wow, so he was suddenly back in close proximity to the woman who had haunted his thoughts for all those years. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
It seems that way. It was like a switch flipped in his mind. Charlotte was back. She was attainable. Or at least that's what his twisted logic must have told him.
And when he couldn't have her, he decided to take it out on these other women.
That's what investigators believe. Unable to erase the pain of rejection, he sought out substitutes, women who look like Charlotte, women who could become stand-ins for the object of his obsession.
It's like he was trying to recreate his past, trying to rewrite the ending, but this time it was a horror story. A tragedy that unfolded in the real world with real victims.
And it serves as a reminder that even decades later, past traumas and obsessions can resurface with devastating consequences.
So when they finally arrested Whitmore, do we know what his reaction was?
Well, as the police were leading him away in handcuffs, he uttered a phrase that sent chills down everyone's spine.
What was it?
He simply said, "Love never dies."
Wow. Talk about a chilling statement. It's like a glimpse into his delusional mind. He truly believed that his actions were justified by some twisted definition of love.
It's a terrifying thought, and it reminds us that the line between love and obsession can be incredibly thin. And when that line is crossed, the consequences can be absolutely devastating.
The Crimson Phantom case, the story of Daniel Whitmore and his victims, it's a stark reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human heart. A story about obsession, rejection, and the deadly consequences of unrequited love.
And it leaves us with some really unsettling questions. What makes some individuals cross that line from obsession to violence? What societal or psychological factors contribute to the creation of a crimson phantom? These are questions that continue to challenge our understanding of the human psyche.
Well, I think you've given our listeners plenty to think about today. It's a fascinating case, but definitely a disturbing one. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
My pleasure. And remember, even in the darkest corners of human behavior, there are always lessons to be learned about ourselves and the world around us.